Hi everyone, I am Laurent Kubaski, the product manager for Files Connect, and today I'm going to tell you about the Files Connect dynamic linking feature. But first, let's talk about static linking, also known as file references. So in this case, I am on an account named Axe, and if I want to share a SharePoint document with this account, I can go on my feed, choose select a file from Salesforce, navigate in SharePoint, select a document, for example this one, click on attach and share it with the feed. This is a file reference which is going to be displayed in your files tab, and if I refresh my screen, the file reference is now listed in the notes and attachments section. So if I click on the file, I go on the file reference details page. So that's a file reference, and that's static linking because you need to manually select the SharePoint document that you want to share with your account. Let's now talk about dynamic linking, which is a way to dynamically link a Salesforce record with some SharePoint documents, for example. So if I go on this custom object, you will see that I have this related list that displays a list of SharePoint documents that are linked to this account. So how do you do this? You don't need to code anything, that's available out of the box, but first let's go in SharePoint Online, and in this case I have linked these documents to my Salesforce record. So what I did is that I created a custom column in SharePoint which contains the Salesforce record identifier. So in this case, I'm using this identifier, and that's the value I have entered in SharePoint. So all these three documents have a custom column called Salesforce ID containing the Salesforce record identifier. So how do you create this related list? To do this, go on your external object. So that's my SharePoint Online external object, and on this external object I have added a custom field called Salesforce ID, and I'm using a lookup relationship. So when you create your new custom field, choose the lookup relationship option. So field of type lookup relationship and external alias Salesforce ID. So what is that? Back in SharePoint, in the SharePoint admin, in the manage properties section, so in this case I'm going to search for my custom column. Okay, so I created a manage property. I created this one, and that's the custom column. So create your manage property on your external object, create a lookup field, and that's all you need to do. From there, just go on your Salesforce record and you will have this related list displayed automatically, no coding. That's one way to link SharePoint documents to a Salesforce record. Let's look at another way, this time using indirect lookups. So when using indirect lookup, you have a custom field, but this time in Salesforce. So you have a custom field containing the identifier, a SharePoint identifier. So now if I go in SharePoint, this time, these documents have a custom column called SharePoint ID, and that's an identifier of your choice. So in this case, I'm using SharePoint ID 1, 1, and 2. It can be any value that you want. So in SharePoint, you have documents that have a custom column with a value, and in Salesforce, you have a field that also contains this value. So in this case, I'm displaying the list of SharePoint documents that have this value. How does it work? Again, let's go on my external object. And to do this, you need to create a custom field on your external object of type indirect lookup. So you create an indirect lookup field. In this case, I named it SharePoint ID. The external alias is also named SharePoint ID. So it's the name of my managed property in SharePoint. And again, that's all you need to do. From there, you get the list of SharePoint documents that match this custom field. The constraint you have is that this value must be unique across all your Salesforce record. So in this case, my Salesforce record is an indirect lookup object. That's the name of my record, and this value must be unique. You cannot have two Salesforce records that have this value. So if I change this from 1 to 2, and if I hit save, this list view is going to be dynamically refreshed, and I have the list of SharePoint documents that have SharePoint ID2 as the custom column value. So in this case, I'm displaying this document, and if we go in SharePoint, that's this document. And last but not least, last example, I call this dynamic lookup. It may not be the best name, but on this record, I have a custom field, again, that could contain 3 values, blue, white, and red. So what if you have a custom field, and what if you have multiple Salesforce records with this value? In this case, you need to do something different. You cannot use an indirect lookup because when using indirect lookup, this value must be unique. It can only be used by one object. So if you want this value to be used by several objects in Salesforce, you need to do some custom coding. So let's have a look in SharePoint. In SharePoint, I have some documents with the color custom column. These 2 documents are red, this one is blue, this one is white. If I go back in Salesforce, if I switch from red to blue, I hit save. In real time, this list view is refreshed. So blue and blue. And if I switch to white, so white and white. How do you do this? This time you need some custom coding, but what doesn't change is the fact that you must, again, on your external object, you must add a new custom field. In this case, it's named color. The external alias, which is the name of the managed property in SharePoint, is also called color. Notice that in this case, there is no lookup or external lookup or indirect lookup relationship. It's just a plain text field. So let's have a look at the code that you need to write. You need to write a class which looks like this. So basically, this class is going to query SharePoint via the external object. So that's the query I am running. And that's my Salesforce custom field API name, and that's the value that I have on my record. So in this case, this is going to be red, white, or blue. So executing this query against the external object will give me a list of records that I'm going to display, and I will display them using a custom page, a visual force page. Let's have a look at the code. Pretty straightforward. I'm just displaying all the fields that are returned by the query. And then I can go on my custom object on the page layout, and on the page layout, that's where I added my visual force page. And from there, I can go back on my record, and when I change the value of this field, my controller is going to be called, is going to query SharePoint and display the results. So let's recap. You can use a direct lookup relationship to display a list of SharePoint documents linked to your record if the Salesforce record identifier is stored in SharePoint. You can use indirect lookups in case you have a custom field on your record that contain a value that exists in SharePoint. In this case, I have a custom column in SharePoint with this value. The constraint is that this value must be unique in Salesforce. You cannot have two records with this value. And finally, what I'm calling dynamic lookup, it's if you want to have several records in Salesforce with this value. In this case, you need to write custom code, but as you saw, you can do this very quickly. And in this case, we call this dynamic linking because you don't create any file reference. It's completely dynamic. This related list is refreshed in real time. Thanks.